Not sure I would have wanted to ask Jesus any questions either. Remember what just happened? Peter has just been chastised by Jesus, called Satan. Get behind me, Satan. And so I'm sure the other apostles may just take a step back today as they're walking along and not really wanting to ask any questions, especially since Jesus keeps talking about death and suffering and being rejected. It's all too much for them. And so human instinct kicks in. They're silent before him, but they begin to argue among themselves who is the greatest. And I think we might ask ourselves, well, what's that all about? Where does that come from? Why do they even begin to bring that up on the journey here? Again, Peter has just been taken to task. And he's been the one that's been set in front of them as the leader, as the one who is Jesus' chosen one. And now Peter has been just rebuked by Jesus publicly, so perhaps there's an opening to be filled. Perhaps there is a clamoring among the apostles that, well, maybe Peter isn't the one, and maybe I could be the one. Jockeying for position, finding one's place in the group. And so they begin to compare notes and compare one another to each other. And as they get to where they're going, Jesus knows what they're talking about. And so he asks them up straight up, what is it you're discussing? And of course they don't tell him, because I think now their bubble has been bursted. They've been shown for who they are. And Jesus then demonstrates that, okay, in order to be great, you have to be little. You have to be small. You have to be like this child. Why? Because when we put ourselves out there as being great, when we build ourselves up, it's kind of like inflating a balloon or a beach ball. We fill it up and it's visible, all right. And with enough hot air, it will rise. But by the same token, it is completely empty. And it is stretched to its maximum, so that the tiniest little prick with a pin will burst it, and it will self-destruct. Compare that to the balloon that is not yet blown up. The balloon that is sitting there. It is not stretched at all, and so the rubber is still rather tough. And you can touch it with a pin, and it's not going to put a hole through it. You're going to have to poke it and then maybe pop it through. A little struggle there. It's tougher, it's stronger. As Jesus describes, be little. You're stronger when you're smaller. When you're little. When you invoke self-control. I think the disciples and we puff ourselves up because we're not really sure what we look like. We're not really sure who we are. And so we have to make ourselves bigger. We have to make ourselves fuller somehow, even if it's full of emptiness. We have to somehow project something because we're not really sure what it is we possess. And so the disciples then begin not only to build themselves up and to puff themselves up, but by the same token, they may begin to take each other down a peg in order to make themselves seem bigger. And that's what our prophet speaks of today in the first reading. Let us beset the just one. Let's attack him. Let's pull him down because he makes us look bad. He makes us look less than we want to be. And so let's tear him down. And let's pull apart his life. And it will make us appear better. Human nature, once again, trying to find its position in society and building itself up either by inflation of self or by tearing the other down. And as we do that, we find what St. James is talking about today, the passions. When we let our passions go without check, we lose control. When we let our passions just run, we then fail to be who we really are. When we let all of those things move us without being dispassionate, without being rational, without being reasonable, without thinking things through, we get ourselves into trouble. We self-destruct. The passions unfettered self-destruct us. That is why Jesus reins his disciples in. Do not burst out, but rather pull yourself in. Be in control of who you are. And that will enable you then to serve, to give yourself to someone else. Because you cannot give yourself away. You cannot serve unless you know who you are. Otherwise, you'll be marked by fear. If I don't know what I possess, if I don't know how much I have in my wallet, I'm going to be very careful about giving it away, because all of a sudden I may reach in and that's my last bill. And so I will be frozen and unable to give. If I don't know what my calendar looks like, then I'm going to be very hesitant to schedule something else in, because I may not have that time. When we don't know, we freeze. We grow hesitant, and we are unable. But when we know who we are, when we know our gifts, when we know our talents, when we know what we possess, well, then there is no fear. I know what I can give you, and I can give it freely then. I know what I can offer, and I can offer it freely. I know who I am. And that keeps us then from needing to inflate ourselves. And it keeps us from needing to pull others down. When we think about it, I wonder how much of our time and energy in comparison we do what the disciples did. Maybe not build ourselves up necessarily, but the opposite. We recognize the fault, failing, nitpickings of others. And we analyze other people. Well, why did they do that? Why would he say that? And look at the fault over there. If we spent an equal amount of time analyzing ourselves, looking at this fault, looking at why I did this or that, we might bring things into better balance. And so I think as Jesus presents the idea of this child and being smaller, and being more in control, and pulling everything in, I am reminded of the example of St. Ignatius of Loyola, who presents us a wonderful model from 500 years ago that is still valid today. He was training a new order of priests in a very difficult time in the Church's history. The Reformation had broken out and confused so many people on the truth of the faith. The Church in certain areas had leaders who were corrupt, and there were new frontiers opening every minute. Ignatius is forming men to go out and meet all of these challenges, to go places where no European had gone before, to travel to lands where there had not been anyone from their land before, and to go and announce the gospel to people who had never even heard the name Jesus Christ before. And in order for these men to be able to do that, to be able to give themselves away freely, they had better know who they are, or they would collapse under the weight of everything they would experience. And so Ignatius set up a regimen for them. Every day, you must examine your conscience. Every day when you wake up, before you get your day started, know who you are. Examine your gifts. Examine your talents. And examine your failings for that day so far. So that when you begin your day, you'll know who you are and what you bring to the table. Before you eat your noon meal, Examine your conscience and know who you are. You've made it halfway through the day now. What have you done well? And what have you failed to do? The day's not over. There's still time. We can change in the afternoon. And before you retire at night, examine your conscience. What have you done with your day? How have you used your gifts and talents well? And where have you failed? And by examining your conscience 3 times every day, Ignatius made sure that his new Jesuits knew who they were, knew their gifts, knew their talents, could be free in giving them, but also knew where their temptations were and knew where their limitations were, so that they knew they had to stop 3 steps before that stage. It's wise advice that kept those men alive and gave them the ability to expand and grow and change the world in the 16th and 17th century, and continue today to do so. But it is advice that is as old as God himself, to know ourselves. When we know ourselves, we possess ourselves, and then we can give ourselves in service to another. And we don't feel the need to expand in our passions, to let them fly haphazardly, to be so big, so full of hot air, that we are so fragile and will burst at the smallest thing. Jesus invites us today. Be who you are, and do not be afraid of that. Possess yourself, examine yourself, and serve others, so that you will not be afraid when the cross comes your way. You will know exactly what you have to offer, and nothing can make you afraid after that.